In this video, we're going to start looking at ABC costing, so Chapter 7. So for this series of videos, it's going to look slightly different. We're not going to be using a whiteboard. I'm going to be doing all of these videos out of Excel just because of the nature of this chapter. It's going to be a lot easier to illustrate some things because of the amount of data that we'll be working with. So for each of these videos, we'll be working through these different sheets within this workbook. All right, so activity-based costing. So this is not something that is GAAP approved, but it's one of those costing systems that really benefits managers if they choose to use this as a supplementary costing system. So on top of the costing system currently being used. So this is only for internal purposes to gain a different perspective on profitability in terms of product margins and customer margins, and actually comparing margins between traditional absorption costing and the ABC method. So activity-based costing, this costing system is designed to provide managers with cost information for strategic and other decisions that potentially affect capacity, and therefore fixed as well as variable costs. So it looks at both of those, and like I mentioned, it's usually used as a supplement to the regular costing system. Most companies won't strictly just use activity-based costing, because first of all, if you're a public company, you have to use absorption costing for external reporting, but also activity-based costing gives you just one perspective. It's important to have it as a supplement, not necessarily as the only costing system that the company is using. And one major thing that sets activity-based costing apart from traditional absorption costing is the fact that non-manufacturing and manufacturing costs, so production and non-production costs, can end up being assigned to products on a cause and effect basis with this system. Well, how is that different? Remember, under absorption costing, regular costing, from the beginning of this class, we learned that only manufacturing costs are attached or assigned to products. The rest are considered to be period costs. Well, here it's not just the cost of manufacturing the product that is included in total product cost, but here in this system you also include non-manufacturing costs on a cause and effect basis. So for example, with the ABC system, you can assign things like sales commissions, shipping costs, and warranty repair costs to specific products, because those are non-manufacturing costs that can be traced to a specific product. Those are traceable non-manufacturing costs. Now, at the same time that we include non-manufacturing costs or some non-manufacturing costs as part of product cost under ABC costing, some manufacturing costs can end up being excluded from product costs. So the ABC system, it'll exclude any costs that are considered to be organization sustaining costs, any idle capacity costs from product costs. So we have two diagrams here, the second one being a little bit more detailed. So under traditional product costing, so absorption costing, all manufacturing costs are included as part of the product's total cost. Under ABC costing, however, not all of manufacturing costs, but most manufacturing costs are included as part of product costs, but also some non-manufacturing costs are also included as part of product costs. So this diagram does a really good job of summarizing, at least visually, how these two systems differ. Let's look at some key definitions and concepts. So another way in which ABC costing will differ from traditional costing is because instead of using one plant-wide overhead rate, or departmental PORs like we've learned about before, ABC costing uses numerous overhead cost pools. So we have numerous overhead rates, so to speak, that we'll look at in a little bit more detail here in a second. But instead of having one POR or a couple of PORs under a traditional method under ABC, we have several. and each one pertains to a specific overhead cost pool. So each cost pool has its own measure of activity, where with traditional costing, the POR or the PORs are going to be based off of either something like direct labor hours, sometimes direct labor dollars, or machine hours. So traditionally, those direct labor hours or machine hours are used to allocate overhead costs to products, where under ABC, we have multiple cost pools with their own PORs, so to speak, their own measures of activity, and those measures of activity aren't just direct labor hours or machine hours. It will include other types of activities as well, which we'll look at in a second. Okay, and there's two common types of activity measures. A transaction driver, that's just how often an activity actually occurs, versus a duration driver, which is just the measure of time needed for an activity to be completed. So we mentioned that under traditional costing systems, we use a regular POR or departmental PORs that are based off of something like direct labor hours or machine hours. So those allocation bases are driven by the volume of production. So the more units we produce, the more direct labor hours and machine hours, for example, we'll end up using. Where with ABC, it's a little bit different because under ABC costing, there's 5 general levels of activity that are defined, and not all of them, most of them actually don't relate to the volume of units produced. They're not volume dependent. So we have product level, organization sustaining, customer level, batch level, and unit level activities. Unit level activity is the only one that will be related to volume. But these other activities aren't related to volume like direct labor hours and machine hours are. So that's the main difference here, is we are looking at a bunch of different activities that largely are not related to the volume of production under ABC costing. So keep on watching and we'll look at a detailed example.